You keep replaying it in your head, wondering what you did wrong. But the truth is, you weren't rejected in a single moment. You were slowly handing over pieces of yourself, hoping they'd finally take you, until there was nothing left for them to refuse. You called it love, but it was a negotiation you were having with yourself, and you were the only one who knew the terms. The ache that you carry, it didn't begin the day they left. It didn't start with the final silence, or the unanswered message that you check again and again. Even now, it began much earlier. It started in a quiet moment of hope, a moment you probably don't even remember. It began the instant you decided, in the silent courtroom of your own mind, that your devotion was a currency you could use to purchase their affection. This entire pattern, this cycle of exhausting effort, it never begins with a genuine desire for another person. It begins with what Dr. Robert Glover calls a covert contract. This is the invisible agreement you signed with your own pain. You offered your loyalty, your time, your emotional energy, not as a free gift, but as a down payment on a future you felt you had to earn. The unspoken expectation, the one you held so tightly, was that you would receive love, validation, and a sense of belonging in return. This wasn't a negotiation you had with them. They were never even aware of the terms. It was a desperate bargain you made with your own feeling of emptiness, a silent plea to have your worth finally affirmed by an outside source, because the silence inside was too much to bear. You told yourself you were being vulnerable. You might have even felt proud of how open you were, how much you were willing to give. But the kind of vulnerability that Brené Brown speaks of, the kind that builds true connection, is about sharing your authentic self with those who have earned the right to see it. It is a slow, reciprocal unveiling. What you were doing was something else entirely. It was a form of emotional floodlighting. You were aiming an unfiltered, high-wattage broadcast of your deepest needs and fears directly at someone who had never asked to hear it, someone whose own heart was never tuned to your frequency. You weren't being vulnerable. You were exposing an open wound from your past, unconsciously hoping they would be the one to finally notice it, to clean it, to stitch it closed. You laid your pain at their feet like a sacred offering, like the most precious thing you owned, and you were left confused, shattered, when they simply stepped over it, perhaps without even noticing it was there. That is the beginning of the wound. Not their rejection of you, but your own offering of a part of yourself that was never theirs to heal. And so the work began. You became the engine of it all, the sole source of warmth in a room that was growing colder by the day. You were the one who would break the silence, sending a message after days of quiet, carefully crafting a question that was casual enough not to sound desperate, but hopeful enough to invite a real response. You were the one who made the plans, suggesting places to go, things to see, weaving a future out of threads they never gave you. You learned to forgive the silences, to translate their distance into something more palatable. You told yourself they were just busy or mysterious, or perhaps they were hurting in a way that only you could understand and heal. The emotional exhaustion you feel now, the one that settles deep in your bones, isn't from the relationship itself. It is the profound, soul-deep fatigue that comes from trying to single-handedly breathe life into something that was never alive to begin with. You were performing constant emotional CPR on a body that had no pulse, convincing yourself that if you just pressed harder, breathed deeper, you would eventually feel a flicker of life in return. The entire time, you mistook this one-sided labor for devotion. But now, in the quiet, you can finally see it for what it was. It's like being the only person left in a vast, empty theater after the curtains have closed. You begin to clap slowly at first, then with more conviction. You are applauding a performance that moved you, a story you believed in with all your heart. First, the sound is satisfying. You think you are honoring the show. But as the silence from the stage becomes absolute, the sound changes. It begins to feel hollow. You soon realize that the deafening, rhythmic echo that fills the cavernous space is just the sound of your own two hands, hitting each other, alone. The performance you were applauding was your own tireless effort. The audience was no one, and that echo, that is the sound of your own hope, returning to you unanswered, showing you, finally, that you have been the only one in the room all along. This pattern of relentless effort, this willingness to be the only one clapping in an empty room, it wasn't born in this relationship. This is an old ghost, a familiar ache that has followed you for years. It is an inheritance, passed down not in a will, but in the quiet moments of your past, in the love that was given with conditions attached. To understand why you fought so hard for them, you have to trace the wound back to its origin. You have to go back to an earlier time, to a younger version of yourself, in a room where you first learned that love was not a guarantee. It was a reward, a prize for good behavior, for quiet compliance, for exceptional performance. You learned that your presence alone was not enough. You had to be useful or brilliant or easy or perfect to be seen, to be chosen. This is where you were trained to believe that love is something you must work for, not something you are inherently worthy of receiving. And so, you became a master of the trade, an expert in earning affection. Think of a child who only receives a parent's warm, undivided attention when they bring home a perfect report card. On other days, the attention is distant, distracted, partial. That child learns a devastating and silent equation. Performance equals value. Affection is the prize for a job well done. Love is the trophy. That child learns to mute their own needs, their own messy feelings, and instead focuses all their energy on achieving the result that will win them that brief moment of sunshine. As an adult, you unconsciously replay the script with devastating precision. You turn relationships into projects and potential partners into judges. You work tirelessly, not to build and share a life, but to ace a test you were given long ago, desperately hoping to finally hear the words you always needed. You've done enough. You are enough. But the test was always rigged, because the validation you are seeking cannot be granted by another person. It was a debt owed to a younger you, and you have been trying to get someone else to pay it ever since. And then comes the moment. It is not a loud, dramatic event. It is a quiet, internal collapse. A singular, soul-crushing moment of clarity when you realize, with a certainty that steals the air from your lungs, that your earnest efforts are not being received as love. They are being perceived as something else entirely. Neediness, desperation, a burden. It is the anatomy of a cringe. It's the visceral, hot shame that washes over you when you see they have read your heartfelt message hours ago, yet there is no reply. It's the hollow feeling in your chest when they cancel a plan at the last minute with a casual excuse that you know isn't the real reason. In that moment, your open heart, the very thing you believed was your greatest gift, becomes an unconscious advantage they hold. They don't have to be cruel or malicious. Their power comes not from their actions, but from their inaction. They can maintain complete control of the dynamic simply by doing nothing, because they know your hope will do all the work for them. Your hope will fill the silence. Your hope will make the excuses. Your hope will keep you waiting. This dawning awareness feels like you have completely misread the world. It is the emotional equivalent of showing up to a formal, black tie event in your pajamas. The horror isn't just the feeling of being exposed, of being seen in your vulnerability. It is the sudden, gut-wrenching understanding that you completely misinterpreted the invitation. You misread the dress code, you misread the tone, you misread the entire room. You thought you were invited to an intimate gathering, a place of warmth and connection. But as you stand there, exposed under the cold lights, you realize with sickening clarity that you were never even on the guest list. And the worst part is the quiet pity in their eyes, or worse, the polite indifference. It's the final confirmation that your emotional investment was not only unreciprocated, it was inappropriate for the situation. You offered your soul at an event that only required small talk. To an outsider, your persistence would seem illogical. After the shame, after the cringe, after the undeniable proof that your efforts were landing in a void, Why did you stay? Why did you keep hoping? The answer is because this dynamic was not just a one-sided relationship. It was a powerful psychological addiction. And the drug you craved was not their love or their attention, but the volatile, unpredictable nature of their indifference. Their distance was the baseline state of withdrawal, a dull, constant ache of longing. But then, just as you were about to give up, a breadcrumb would appear. A sudden text after days of silence. A brief moment of unexpected warmth. A cryptic compliment that you would analyze for hours. This is the science of intermittent reinforcement. An unpredictable reward is far more powerful, far more addictive, than a consistent one. You weren't addicted to them, you didn't truly know the person behind the silence. You were addicted to the possibility of finally winning their approval. You were addicted to the story you told yourself about what that approval would finally mean about your own worth. It was a chemical rush, a high you chased at any cost, and the cost was your dignity, your peace, and your connection to yourself. You were a gambler, sitting alone at a slot machine in a dark corner of a casino, long after everyone else has gone home. The machine rarely pays out, but you are not playing for a life-changing jackpot. You are playing for the brief flash of light and the cascade of sound that promises, maybe next time. That momentary thrill is enough to make you forget the hours of empty, silent pulls of the lever. It's enough to make you ignore the growing pile of spent tokens at your feet, each one a piece of your self-respect, a moment of your life, an unanswered question. You kept feeding the machine, convinced that the next pull would be the one to change everything, to validate all your losses, to prove your faith was justified. You were so focused on the hypnotic lights of the machine that you failed to realize the only thing it was designed to do was take your currency and keep you sitting there, hoping for a prize that was never meant to be yours. The house always wins. And in this case, the house was your own hope. Here, the entire belief system you constructed with such care begins to tremble. The foundation cracks and the walls come down. This is the moment the painful, liberating truth finally lands. You weren't in love with a person. You were in love with a potential that you invented. You didn't fall for them. You fell for the hope they gave you. You were worshiping a ghost. This phantom was constructed from all your unmet needs, your deferred dreams, and the deep, aching desire to finally be seen fully. You built them in your head, gave them a voice, imagined their thoughts, and fell deeply in love with this beautiful creation. And you kept offering pieces of your authentic self to this phantom, polishing the altar, lighting the candles, refusing to see the real, indifferent, and emotionally unavailable person who stood before you. The person who rarely called, who gave vague answers, who remained distant. That was the reality. The person you loved was the one who would one day change, one day see you, one day return the monumental love you were giving. You weren't in a relationship with them. You were in a profound and deeply committed relationship with your own longing. It's like you have been tending to a mannequin in a quiet shop window every single day for months, or even years. You bring it gifts. You change its clothes to match the seasons. You speak to it, telling it about your day, your fears, your deepest dreams. You gently wipe the dust from its unblinking glass eyes and clean the window that separates you from it, believing that your devotion will somehow animate it. In your mind, you are in a deep, committed, and loving relationship, but you are the only one who knows it exists. The final rejection you felt, the silence that felt so personal, it wasn't an act of malice from the mannequin. It was simply the store owner, a stranger you never met, finally arriving to board up the window, to turn off the lights, and to walk away. The connection wasn't severed, because a one-way connection was never truly forged. The altar simply collapsed because you were the only one holding it up. This is the most difficult turn on this entire path. It is the moment where the story you've told yourself about being a victim begins to dissolve. Their final no, their ultimate, deafening silence, the slow fade into nothingness that you have replayed in your mind 1,000 times. It was not a judgment of your worth. It was not a verdict on your lovability handed down by a superior court. It was a mirror. It was a perfect, brutal, and honest reflection of the boundaries you had failed to set for yourself. They didn't need to push you away. They simply had to stand still while you ran yourself, full speed, into a wall that you refused to see was there. Their inaction became the stark, unavoidable mirror showing you your own frantic, exhausting, and unrequested action. The pain you feel is real, but its source is not what you think. You weren't rejected. You were finally confronted with the consequences of your own self-abandonment. Imagine you see someone walking down a long road, carrying their own luggage. From a distance, you decide they must need your help. You run to them, insisting on carrying their bags. They politely decline, saying, "No, thank you, I'm fine." But you cannot accept this. You are convinced that your help is essential, that your strength is needed. You begin to follow them, jogging alongside them, pleading your case, explaining how much better, how much faster you could carry their luggage for them. Your insistence grows, your voice becomes more desperate. The person begins to walk faster, uncomfortable, trying to create distance. Finally, cornered and exhausted by your relentless pursuit, they stop, turn, and shout, "Leave me alone!" In that moment, your heart breaks. You feel rejected, misunderstood, punished for your kindness. But the rejection was never about the quality of your help. It was never a judgment on your character. It was the only tool they had left to stop your intrusion into a journey they never invited you on. Their final boundary was a direct response to your lack of one. So if the rejection was a mirror, why is the pain so immense? If the person was a ghost you were worshipping, why does the loss feel so real, so physical? The grief you feel now, the one that visits you in the quiet of the night, is so profound because it's not just for the person you lost. In fact, it's barely about them at all. It is for the future you meticulously designed in your mind. This is the unique, private, and often silent pain of mourning something that never actually existed. You are grieving imagined conversations that never happened. You are grieving a life you would build together, a comfort you would finally find, and the person you hoped you would become once you finally received the love you were chasing. It is the ache of a phantom limb. The loss is palpable, you can feel its shape and its weight, but the thing you are missing was never truly attached to you. It's a grief you feel you have no right to claim, which makes it the loneliest grief of all. You cannot explain to others that you are mourning a future that only you ever saw. You are like an architect, grieving over a set of beautiful, intricate blueprints for a home that was never built. For months, you lived inside those drawings. You knew the way the morning light would fall through the kitchen window. You could feel the texture of the wooden floors under your feet and the warmth from the fireplace you had designed for the living room. You had chosen the colors for the walls, planted a garden in your mind, and heard the sound of laughter echoing in hallways that were never constructed. You lived a full life within those paper walls. The pain you feel is the realization that this beautiful design, this perfect sanctuary, was drawn on a plot of land that was never for sale. It belonged to someone else all along, or perhaps it never even existed. You are grieving the collapse of a masterpiece that no one else ever got to see. You are mourning the loss of a home you loved, a home you built, a home where you were finally safe, even if it was only ever made of paper and hope. For so long, you spent countless hours, sleepless nights, trying to decipher their silence. You treated their lack of communication like a complex riddle, a sacred text with a hidden meaning that only you were perceptive enough to decode. You replayed every past conversation, searching for clues you might have missed. Was it something you said? Was it something you did? You interpreted their silence as a sign of their own depth, their own profound pain, their own emotional complexity. You told yourself it was a puzzle to be solved, when it was actually a statement to be accepted. Their lack of communication was not complicated. It was the clearest message they could have possibly sent. It said, "I am not available for this." It said, "I do not choose this," it said. "My energy is not here." You simply weren't ready to hear it, because the quiet confirmed your deepest fear. You were alone in your hope. The silence wasn't a void waiting to be filled by your understanding. It was a solid wall you kept walking into. You were standing on a desolate shore, screaming questions at a ship that was already a tiny speck on the horizon. You spent all of your energy trying to decipher the shape of its sails, the meaning of its flag, the direction of the wind. You analyzed its speed, its trajectory, its silent glide across the water, believing that these details held the key to understanding why it was leaving. You exhausted yourself searching for a complex reason, a hidden narrative. But the only message that ever mattered was the simple, undeniable, and growing distance between you and that ship. The message was the departure itself. Their silence was not an invitation to try harder, to shout louder, to find a better way to be heard. Their silence was their final answer. The lack of explanation was the explanation. And accepting that is the beginning of letting the echo in the empty room finally fade away. It's the beginning of turning away from the horizon and noticing the solid ground beneath your own feet. It is vital, as you stand here looking back, to understand this final, crucial distinction. It is the difference between giving and offering. From the outside, they can look almost identical, but internally, they are worlds apart. Giving is an act of authentic generosity that comes from a place of fullness. It is seeing that your own pitcher is full of clean water, and you pour a glass for another simply because you have more than enough to share. Giving asks for nothing in return because it does not empty you. In fact, it often makes you feel more full. It is an act of expansion. But offering, in the way that you did it, is a plea that comes from a place of deficit. It is a desperate transaction, disguised as a gift. You weren't giving love from a place of abundance. You were offering up your very self as a sacrifice at their altar, secretly hoping that in return, they would grant you the worth you didn't feel you had. Every act of kindness, every thoughtful gesture, had an invisible price tag attached, a silent hope for reciprocation that you may not have even admitted to yourself. This is the most painful truth to face. You weren't just giving them your time and energy. You were trying to prove that you had something of value. You were taking your own pitcher, one that felt perilously empty to you, and tipping it over their cup, desperately hoping that some magical, miraculous drops would appear. You hoped that the act of pouring would somehow create the water, proving to both them and yourself that you were not empty after all, that you had something worthy to give. The final rejection was them simply showing you, without malice, that your pitcher was empty. Not because you are inherently empty or have nothing of value to give, but because you had already poured everything out, not for them, but for the hope that someone else could fill you. You weren't a giver of love. You were a seeker of it, and your gifts were just the map you used, hoping it would lead you back to yourself through them. According to Brené Brown, true belonging is not something you can negotiate or perform your way into. It never, ever requires you to betray yourself to fit in. And this desperate, relentless search for their approval, this cycle of offering and waiting, was a constant and painful act of self-betrayal. With every text you sent into the void, with every excuse you made for their indifference, with every time you silenced your own needs to accommodate their distance, you abandoned yourself. You left yourself standing alone on that shore. The immense, crushing pain you feel now, the one you thought was about them, is actually the sound of your true self. It is the part of you that you left behind, the one you silenced for so long, finally calling for you to come home. It is not a celebratory return. It is a painful, agonizing, but sacred homecoming to the person you were before you decided you had to be someone else to be loved. Gabor Mate teaches that our deepest wounds and most painful patterns often stem from a fundamental disconnection from our own authentic feelings. The entire cycle of offering yourself was driven by a refusal to feel the initial, subtle pain of their disinterest. You couldn't bear the small, quiet pang of rejection, so you built an elaborate fantasy to numb it. A future, a hope, a potential that could shield you from the simple, uncomfortable truth. The crushing final rejection, the one you thought was the wound, was not the wound at all. It was the surgery. It was the radical, non-consensual procedure that finally, brutally, cut away the fantasy you were hiding behind. It exposed the original disconnection from yourself, and in doing so, it created the very first possibility to finally reconnect. The silence you feared so much, the unanswered knock that haunted you, is now the only place true awareness can begin. Not by fixing the wound, but by finally having the courage to sit with it, to listen to it, and to let it tell you what you have needed to hear all along. We have put together a short guide to help you put a name to these invisible wounds. It is not a map to a cure. It is a mirror to help you see the shape of your own pain more clearly. It is free and it is honest. The link is in the description below. See. If you saw your reflection in this story, know this: the offering ends here. But the rebuilding begins in silence, on another path, in another voice. That journey doesn't happen here, but it waits for you just across the way.